Hey everybody, welcome back to Gettysburg 159. We're really happy to be here. We're lucky to be here. This is a beautiful battlefield. It's a meaningful battlefield, and we're trying to take you to as many places as possible, and we're glad that you're joining us for the ride. You know, we talk about fighting a lot. You know, it is a battle after all, so we talk about it, but these are also humans, and humans are thinking about their physiological needs. If you're tired, hungry, and thirsty, you're often thinking about food, water, and sleep, not independence and slavery and the minutiae of battle, and soldiers wrote this time and again. And what they're constantly writing about and constantly dealing with, just like us today, are the elements. So this video is going to focus in a little bit on the elements. And, you know, first we're going to talk a little bit about weather. And we're going to turn it over to our friend Bryan Cheeseboro. He's on the board of the Alliance to Protect the Civil War Defenses of Washington, National Archives, and whatnot. Bryan, take it away.
Thanks, Gary. Actually, Alliance to Preserve the Civil War Defenses of Washington, and yes, the National Archives, although I'm not speaking for either one, I guess, today.
I'm sorry, I've been messing this up for 3 years now, Bryan.
That's okay. That's okay. Just thinking about the weather, and as I was telling Gary and Sarah earlier, that weather is like that common denominator of the human experience. When it's too hot, when it's too cold, whenever it's a flood, it's an earthquake, we're talking about the weather. We're always talking about, you know, what's going on. So we can be sure that people of the time did as well. I do believe that. Of course, how they experienced it and how they dealt with it, given the clothing that they wore and such things, it was very different. They didn't have, on a hot day, oh, well, I can go home and be in air conditioning, you know, or such things like that. They, you know, digging out of the snow might not have been something that they did. So it was a different experience for them. But also, one of the other things, too, is that the clothing that they wore, in many ways, was different than what we wear now. They typically relied on wool, cotton, and linen, and that was pretty much it, and silk too. And most of that was wool for a lot of people, including the soldier's uniform. As I have this here, this is my unlined fatigue blouse or sack coat, as the soldiers called it, and I'll go ahead and put this on. And it's the uniform that the soldiers wore that many are familiar with, that they wore when they were supposed to be for fatigue duty, chopping wood, moving objects or whatever, as opposed to the 9-button frock coat, which is more dressy and such. But this coat was commonly worn by many Civil War soldiers, or at least Union soldiers. So you identify it by the 4 buttons, and it's got the eagle button there, which I always love. Really says Civil War soldier to me. But the other thing about it that I think is really, really cool is that it's, I believe, a forerunner of the modern suit jacket, because when you do this and you open it up, it looks very much like a modern suit jacket. And this may be the reason why on modern suit coats, many of them have this, the buttonhole there on this left side. So again, when you think about being out here, and today is a pretty nice day. It's very, the breeze really makes everything. So it's sunny, it's warm, but there's a great breeze going through. And another thing about wool, it's a natural fiber, so the breeze goes right through it. People are always asking with reenacting, aren't you hot in that? Isn't that too much? Yeah, it's a lot. But the uniform doesn't bother me personally all that much. It's a little scratchy, but I'm not too worried about that. And of course, when I have it on, I have on my long sleeve shirt or whatever. I have linen, cotton, and wool. But anyway, this is what these soldiers wore. And they, again, this is all they knew in many cases. So they didn't know about a lot of things that we take for granted. Air conditioning, moisture wicking fabric, all those sorts of things. So they were comfortable, as we can say. So thank you all. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Bryan. And I just want to say that there's big news in the Gettysburg weather community. We are at Gettysburg after all, and many of you might be familiar that Professor Michael Jacobs of Gettysburg College, a professor there, I just said that, he kept detailed readings 3 times a day, even during the battle, of the temperature and whatnot. Now, and we've been using this for years, and we know that, you know, the July 3rd is the hottest day. of that whole summer, I believe. July 2nd is the second hottest day of the summer. July 1st isn't quite as hot, but you look at it, and I think it's upper 70s on the first day, low 80s on the second day, high 80s on the third day. But when you read what the soldiers had to say, they're clearly talking about more heat than that. And what Jacobs didn't write down, of course, was the heat index, or the real feel, so to speak. What a battlefield guide, I believe it's Jeff Harding, excuse me, Jeff, if I got it wrong, as well as a partner, a meteorologist that used to work for the Weather Channel, pretty cool stuff, it couldn't be more perfect. They've been doing research on it, and they found that the professor's son had mistranscribed some of what Professor Jacobs had done and didn't write all the data down. So there's more that he actually gave than just the temperature, but he did not give the exact information we need to calculate the heat index or the real feel. But what they did was go up and found at Harrisburg two different, weather watchers were actually making recordings, and they did include all that information just 40 miles away from here or so for this part of Pennsylvania. And together now, breaking news in Gettysburg Magazine and on the Battle of Gettysburg podcast, I'm a super fan, by the way, you can now learn about what the real feel was at Gettysburg. I haven't finished the article or the podcast yet, so I can't even reveal it, and you should check this out on your own. Check out the Gettysburg Magazine, check out the Battle of Gettysburg podcast, and while you're at it, check out Addressing Gettysburg. These are great to listen to while you're walking, while you're in the car, while you're mowing the lawn, if you have loud enough headphones. It's pretty cool stuff. So that's just one thing. Secondly, here we stand at Menchie Spring. It was great to come to a place that most people don't get to come. This was on my guide test in 1994. Where is Menchie Spring? Well, here it is, at the base of East Cemetery Hill, Menchie Spring. What's interesting is that Menchie owned land over there, not here, and Raffensperger owned land over here. And yet the spring at his property is called Menchie's, and I think there was a spring over there called Raffensperger's, and that was on Menchie's property. So we wanted to show you this, and then I'm going to grab the camera from Sarah, where she's going to talk about another element that I was just mentioning, water.
Well, thanks again for joining us with this video. We've been looking at some of those elements, how hot it was, as Bryan was mentioning, and these new developments, this new research that's coming to light. It's so exciting. I think many of us can relate to being outside on a really hot day. Maybe you've been out on a battlefield, maybe you've had to go out and mow the lawn or just run errands. And if it's really warm, and particularly if you're out doing something, what do you want after a while? A nice drink of water. Well, Civil War soldiers have interesting experiences when it comes to water. A canteen is normally what they're going to carry their water in, so I'm sure many of you have seen those. They're very practical, but they don't carry a ton of water, so you're going to want to refill them rather quickly. There's a lot of Union regiments on the march to Gettysburg that are really mad at their officers because their officers aren't letting them stop and refill those canteens whenever they want. This kind of becomes a problem. It's this conflict between different officers and their troops. Well, you want water, but you're in a battle, so you probably don't even have a chance to break ranks and go find some. What happens if you're wounded? You can't move and get water. Water is crucial, and water is one of those things that will sometimes be a uniting factor or a common denominator, if I can borrow Bryan's term. Both men in both colored coats want water. So sometimes, like the famous Spangler Springs, you'll have soldiers coming together just to get some water and hey, we'll just take a little break on the shooting. Other times you'll have soldiers who are being compassionate. They're filling up empty canteens, carrying them to the wounded, things like that. Now, there's so many troops that come into the area of Gettysburg, and this happens at other battlefields as well, that it becomes really hard to find clean water. There's a lot of civilian accounts here at Gettysburg about wells being pumped dry, or the pump handles on these wells breaking because so many soldiers are using them to refill those canteens to get that crucial water that they need. So then they'll be turning to springs, trying to get fresh water here, maybe even the creek. Remember, this is an era where they don't know about germs, so they're looking for something cool, something wet to drink, and they're gonna drink water that us modern folks would be like, oh, that is so gross looking. But the water does get really gross around Gettysburg. especially the natural water sources, so the creeks, the springs. There's a lot of contamination that's going on, and this is from a couple of different reasons. So first of all, you're going to have wounded and you're going to have dying that are going to end up in or near the water source. That's going to be a source of contamination. Then you have guys, and again, this happens at lots of battlefields and lots of camps. They don't want to use the tree, and they don't want to dig a latrine, and they just do their business at the water source. Not good for health. We'll just leave it at that. The other thing to keep in mind is you've got thousands of horses in this area. Horses eat lots of things, which also means they make lots of manure, and that's going to be all over the area. As it rains in the aftermath of the battle, you're going to have a lot of carnage from the human casualties, you're going to have the equestrian casualties, and you're also going to have a lot of horse manure that's going to have to end up somewhere, and a lot of it's going to flow into these water sources, and that becomes a problem. In the immediate aftermath of Gettysburg, there's quite a few mentions of the difficulty of finding clean water. So those are just little things that perhaps we don't think about. Perhaps we take our clean water in our water bottles for granted. But keep it in mind. What was the soldier experience? Did he have water? Was it clean water? Was it water that was going to make him sick in a few days? Just some things to keep in mind. And I think we have water bottles in the American Battlefield Trust store, so you might want to check those out. I don't have one on me today, but that is a way to carry your clean, cool water when you're out on battlefields. Thank you for joining us for this discussion about some of those elements, a little bit of environment, a little bit of the physical needs of soldiers, and we're glad that you're joining us for the 159th anniversary videos, and we'll be back with more. Thank you for your support of battlefield preservation.